Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Batra. We are up to Perek Ted Mishnah Hey. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'elui Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Ranbai Veliyahu ben Burchai Israelov Chana bad Miriam Sason ben Ryan Yoshua ben Shifra Menuchatam began Eden Amen and Lavdi ben Chaim lechaim with the Refuah Shelemav Daniel Shalom ben Rosa Betor Shachol Israel and the Achlama Merav ben Amin Od Sion Chai ben Dvorah. Since the previous Mishnah taught about various types of wedding gifts, this Mishnah discusses a related subject, betrothal gifts, sivlonot as the Mishnah calls it. Even though the rulings have nothing to do with the main subject of our chapter, the laws of inheritance. In the times of the Mishnah, it was customary for a groom to send his bride gifts such as jewelry, delicacies, or casks of wine or oil on the day after their betrothal. Sometimes he would also visit his bride in her father's home and feast with her on that day. Nowadays, we perform Nisuin immediately after the betrothal, after the Kiddushin, but in earlier times, the two were separated by a period that was often up to a year long, during which time the bride would remain in her father's house. The Mishnah discusses what must be done with such gifts if the couple in fact does not get married. Hasholech sivlonot lebet chamiv. If a groom sends betrothal gifts for his bride to the house of his father-in-law, the law is as follows. Shalach sham mea maneh, if he sent even 100 manes worth of gifts, which is the equivalent of 10,000 zuz, a very large sum. V'achal sham seudat chatan afilu b'dinar, and then he went there on the day that he sent the gifts and he ate a groom's feast there that was worth at least a dinar. Now the meal that was served to the groom when he visited after sending his betrothal gifts was called a groom's feast, as it was served in honor of the groom and the gifts he had sent. In order for a meal to be considered significant enough to be considered a groom's feast, it had to be worth at least a dinar. In this case, enan nigbin, the gifts cannot be taken back if for some reason the marriage is not completed. Since the groom came and ate a significant feast with his bride in his father-in-law's house, we assume that due to the great joy he has while doing so, he allows her to keep the gifts no matter what happens later. Therefore, if the bride or groom dies, or if the groom decides to divorce his bride rather than marry her with nisuin, she or her heirs may keep the gifts. If the bride wishes to call off the marriage and the groom divorces her, she must return the gifts, even if he ate the groom's feast with her, as the Gemara says on page 146b in Bava Batra. Lo achal sham seudat chatan, but if he did not eat a groom's feast there, meaning either he did not come to eat with her at all, or he ate a meal that was worth less than a dinar, which does not cause the great joy that would have made him give her the gifts unconditionally, hare elu nikbin, and the gifts can be collected from her if the marriage does not take place, because we assume that he intended for her to keep the gifts only if they would be married in the end. Therefore, if the groom dies, his heirs may collect the gifts from the bride. If the bride dies, the groom may collect them from her heirs. And if the groom divorces her before Nisuin, she must return the gifts. Now this ruling speaks of cases where the groom did not make his intentions clear. The Mishnah now rules regarding cases where the groom stated his intentions more clearly. Shalach sivlonot merubin sheyachzeru imah lebet baalah. If he sent many betrothal gifts but stated clearly that he was sending them so that they would return with her to her husband's house, meaning his own house, when she would undergo nisuin, harel or nikbin, then they are collected from her if the marriage is not completed, because he clearly intended for her to keep them only if they would get married, meaning what the groom meant when he said that he was sending the gifts so that they would return with her to her husband's house is that he's only intending for her to keep it if they would get married. Sivlonot mu'atin shetishtamesh ban bebet aviyah. On the other hand, if he sent her only a few betrothal gifts and stated that they were for her to use while in her father's house as an arusa, he clearly had no intention of getting them back, and not nikbin, and they are not collected from her, even if the marriage is cancelled before they have been used up. Now, the Mishnah chooses a case of many gifts that the groom gave on condition that they should be brought to his house, and contrast it with the case of a few gifts given to her to use in her father's house, only because this is usually what a groom would do. In truth, however, the law depends entirely on the groom's words, not on the number of gifts. If he said that he wanted the bride to bring the gifts to his house, then even if he gave only a few gifts, they must be returned if the marriage does not take place. And if he said that the gifts were intended for her to use in her father's house, then even if he gave her many gifts, they are hers to keep, even if the marriage does not end up taking place. And that is the end of Mishnah Hay. Now, as we have learned, the sages decreed that a seriously ill person has the ability to give out his property, even through verbal instruction, and the recipients of his gifts do not need to make a kinyan to acquire them. The first section of Mishnah Vav discusses what type of gifts are covered by this decree. Shchiv meira shekatav kol nechasav la'acherim. If a seriously ill person wrote a document giving all of his properties to others. Now again, the Mishnah says that the person wrote the gift into a document, but as we learned earlier in chapter 8, Mishnah 6, this type of gift is valid even if made verbally. The document is mentioned only because it was common to record sickbed gifts in a document so that the giver's wishes can be carried out accurately. So if the seriously ill person wrote a document giving all of his properties to others, Vishiel karka kolshu, but he left over some land for himself. Now the law is the same if the property he left for himself was movable property rather than land. Although the Mishnah states that the giver kept only a kolshu, which literally means a minute amount, the Gemara explains that this is not meant literally. Rather, the giver kept enough property to support himself should he survive. Matanato kayemet. The law is that his gift remains valid even if he recovers from his illness. Since he left some property for himself, clearly he was not thinking that he would surely die, and we assume that he meant for the gifts to take place even if he were to survive. This is not considered a deathbed gift, and it works only if a kinyan was made. Such a partial gift, even when it is made by a seriously ill person, is not considered a true deathbed gift, and therefore it is valid even if the person recovers. For the same reason, such a gift would not be valid unless the recipients made a kinyan to acquire the property, as the sages' decree allowing such gifts without a kinyan applies only to true deathbed gifts. Lo shir karka kolshu en matanato kayemet, but if he did not leave over some land for himself, rather he gave away all of his properties. Now it does not matter whether he gave all of the property to one person or distributed it to many people, as long as he kept nothing for himself, then his gift does not remain valid if he recovers. When a seriously ill person gives away everything that he owns, he is clearly doing so only because he believes that he will not survive. Therefore, it is a true deathbed gift. No kinyan is required, and if he recovers, the properties remain his. Now, even if a kinyan was made, the gift is not valid if the person recovers, because one who gives away all of his property clearly means for the gift to be valid only if he dies. Now, the distinction taught by the Mishnah here between a gift of some of one's property and a gift of all of one's property applies only when the seriously ill person did not state explicitly that he was distributing his property because he thought that he was going to die. If he did so, however, for example, if while writing the document he complained about the fact that he was about to die, then even a partial gift would be cancelled if he recovered, and the gift would be valid even without a kinyan if he died, for it is a true deathbed gift. Now, the second part of the Mishnah discusses a case where it is not clear whether a person who distributed his property was seriously ill when he did so. Lo katav ba shchiv meira, a person who is now healthy, wrote a gift document giving all of his property to others, and it was not written in the document that the giver was a seriously ill person. Now, when a seriously ill person was giving a gift, the witnesses would sometimes record the state of his health within the document, using language like while he was lying in his deathbed, and the document of a healthy person would sometimes contain language indicating the giver's health, like while he was on his feet and walking in the market. In this case, however, the document did not contain language of either sort. There then arose an argument between the giver and the people to whom the gifts were given. The giver says that he was seriously ill when he wrote the document, and now that he has recovered, the gift should be invalid. The giver had given away all of his property, so he claimed that the gift should be cancelled now that he has recovered. Then but the people named in the document say that he was healthy when he wrote the document, and therefore the gift should still be valid. According to the recipients, the gifts had been the regular gifts of a healthy person, so the giver could not retract. The recipients obviously claimed that a kinyan had been made upon the gifts, for otherwise they would not be valid even according to their claim that the giver was healthy. So they say he was healthy and we made a kinyan. In such a case, the giver must bring proof that he was seriously ill when the gifts were given. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. According to Rabbi Meir, since right now the person is healthy, we assume that he was healthy when the gifts were given, unless he can prove otherwise. Therefore, the gifts are valid unless the giver brings witnesses who testify that he was indeed seriously ill at the time he gave the gifts. But the sages say the burden of proof rests upon the one who wishes to take something away from his fellow. Since the giver is the one holding the property and the recipients want to take it from him, they must prove that the gifts were valid. Therefore, if they want to be awarded the property, they must bring witnesses that the giver was healthy at the time the gifts were given. And the Rav tells us the halakha follows the opinion of the Chachamim. And that is the Rabbotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.